get us. Share my screen. All right. So welcome all. This is meeting 17 of our short-term rental working group, proving once again how hard we work. The focus, the agenda, as you'll see, is quite short because we're really going to spend the whole meeting going right back in to talk about our draft bylaws. And our real focus here is trying to drive toward consensus. So I did a lot of thinking over the weekend of all the negotiation theory and practice, in addition to being a facilitator and mediator, I am also a negotiation trainer. CBI, we are brought in by the UN agencies, federal agencies, corporations all across the world to teach them all how to be better negotiators. And we draw on a theory that, comes out of the program on negotiation at Harvard, that our version of it we call the mutual gains approach. But anybody who's read Getting to Yes, which is the most popular version of this, will probably find these ideas quite familiar. And, back in the old days when I joined CBI, I've been with CBI now for 24 years, and we used to try to bring training into our projects. So we would convene an advisory group like yourselves, and we would begin with some, in-depth training in negotiation in order to really prepare the group for trying to reach smart, wise agreements. That's sort of gone by the wayside. I think, it felt a little bit pedantic and overly didactic, and people were not necessarily that excited to become students. In these contexts, particularly when we had groups who were in conflict with each other. The last thing they wanted to do was thumb wrestling exercises and the like. Nevertheless, I really do think we are at a point in this process where a couple of key negotiation skills could be really helpful for the group to keep in mind. So I do want to just offer, if you don't mind, just a few things to keep in mind. The first one is something we in the negotiation field called BATNA, which is the best alternative to a negotiated agreement, BATNA. And the idea of a BATNA is what will happen if we don't have an agreement at the negotiating table. That is what's your best alternative to reaching agreement here together, and not only reaching agreement here together, but reaching agreement that will be supported at town meeting. So what happens if we don't get agreement at town meeting? What happens to the things you care about, to your interests, if we aren't able to get a proposal through to town meeting, right? Now, you each might have your own view about what is most likely to happen should that occur, but I do ask you to keep it in mind, because failure to find something that we can live with and that we think that the community can live with will mean whatever that alternative is will be what takes place, right? And my best guess at the moment is, at the very least, what it's going to mean is no regulations, no legal protections, more warring citizen petition articles, more lawsuits, perhaps eventually things getting resolved, some things getting resolved by courts. But I think also less civic capacity to come together on other issues that really matter to the people of Nantucket. So, it may be that some future group could get a different thing together, or citizen petitions will eventually get passed. But at least in the short run, it feels like if this group, if you all can't do it, the chances of getting to 2/3 is going to be pretty hard. Another negotiation skill I want to sort of put out there is the idea of making wise trade-offs. And that is in order to get a consensus agreement, as I think I mentioned, you're not all going to get everything that you love. You are going to have to make some trade-offs. And what you want to do is make wise trade-offs. So what you want to do is say, okay, I can live with some things that might be a little less important to me in order to get some things that are really more important to me, right? So that is having a clear sense of your own priorities, what it is you think is most important to achieve, and being able to make those trade-offs. And then the last thing I want to put forward, at least right now, is the idea of making contingent agreements in the face of uncertainty. So, for example, there's quite a bit of uncertainty about what exactly will happen as a result of the policy proposals that we are putting forward. And some people think that they're very concerned about that the proposals we're putting forward are either going to have too much of a negative impact on the ability of people to short-term rent who might need to, or who might want to, or people who might want to be able to come and rent as visitors in the future. Others have the opposite concern, that it's just not going to have enough impact on stemming the growth of short-term rentals or investment-only short-term rentals. And so I do want to encourage you to think about, given that uncertainty, what might you do as a group to try and hedge your bets for the future, right? And I think you've been talking about that in terms of things like sunset clauses and things like that. But I want to encourage you to also think about, maybe there's some kind of commitment to come back together, whether it's this group or a future group, to examine data about what has happened and make recommendations for new changes for the future. So that is sort of a classic negotiation move for dealing with future uncertainty, that allows the group not to get stuck now on things that have to do with things we don't know about the future. So just wanted to put those three things forward as we're getting started. As we move into, okay, here's what we have on the table. There may be some new things people are proposing. What can we do to try and get to the finish line with as much consensus as possible? So let me stop there. Peter.
Just a quick thing. No matter what we present, this is a select board article. So the select board can cut it and dice it whatever the way they want once we present it to them. So, we're just giving suggestions, and we don't have the right to stipulate another group will be formed to follow up. It's not in our task.
Yeah, I mean, you can propose it. I think this group's job is to propose the best possible policy package. And that might include things like, hey, let's get back together in X number of years let's make sure we're collecting data X, Y, and Z so that in that future time, people are really able to, you know, to understand and make adjustments. So, David?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's crazy for anyone on this board to believe that whatever package we end up bringing forward is the answer from here until the turn of time. So I think that it's only responsible to suggest or to the select board that the short-term numbers that we start to collect in the registry be looked at and examined on a yearly basis, to make changes that best suit the needs of the island. And to suggest that this is a one and done and we don't have to worry about it anymore is kind of silly.
Yeah.
Thanks.
John?
Well, I just think I've sat through a lot of town meetings, and the last two were, ended, I guess the last three ended in, no progress on this subject. And I think right now, whilst people may be interested in, well, they're going to come back and have a look at it again, I think they're just looking for this group to say, and this is how it ought to be. Going forward, this is how it ought to be. And just like any other subject, come next April or May at town meeting, at least the general bylaws anyway, will come up. But I really think, Stacey, people are looking more than anything else like, okay, what are you asking us to vote on? And I don't think we should water that down too much. Well, don't worry, we're going to come back again in a year. I don't think that's going to wash too well. Thank you.
Okay. Julia?
I think what John just said is really important to take into consideration. I think the group is being looked at as, I think there's a reason people have passed on in past years. Things weren't ready, people weren't ready. I think people are going to grow tired, frankly, of, having this issue at town meeting if they're not already. But I also feel like, you may or may not have read the letter that I sent around to the work group or a little earlier this afternoon, not much earlier. And it echoes what you may have already known about. We've been talking to a lot of our supporters and taking this very seriously, like what you said, Stacey. What could change in the proposal? Because of course the ideal scenario is that we all agree on the proposal that goes to town meeting. There's no doubt about that. There's a reason why, a representative of ACT now, like why you agreed to be on this work group and to spend all this time. And it's because we were hopeful to come to a solution. Unfortunately, there are a lot of differing views in our supporter groups, right? And so we're not representing a small group, we're representing a large group of people who have different opinions. Some of them feel very strongly against, I'll call it grandfathering, but allowing existing fully commercial or corporate STRs to continue. Some of them feel strongly about other things, but everyone seems to agree that the zoning proposal that's being put forward is a non-starter. And as much as, Stacey and I had a discussion last week on could there be amendments to the general bylaw that would sort of, act as a similar lever, if you want, than an accessory use article instead of while keeping the full codification, is there something that would sort of mimic the accessory use zoning in the general bylaw? And we rattled our brains quite a bit on this and, pinged some people who are, important in our supporter group, and it doesn't seem to be enough. So, as much as we would love to agree that the zoning is the way to go, there's no support, or there's not enough support from the supporter group that I represent. And I'm not coming to you saying this is great news. I wish that we had had a more serious conversation about the accessory use. I still, and I think a lot of people believe that it could work in a much closer fashion than maybe has been already assumed by people who may not like it. But I just wanted to make sure that you all understood that this is not coming from a place, other than trying to make it work for everyone. And, I appreciate that if people have ideas beyond what has already been discussed, obviously, we're open to suggestions.
Peter.
I unfortunately was in Panama when you met last week, and I didn't have an opportunity personally to weigh in on some of this. And so I guess I'd like to take an opportunity now to sort of give you my view on things. First of all, if I was hearing you right, Stacey, I tend to agree with the idea that less is more at this point in our operations if we're going to get something across the goal line. Trying to stuff everything into this bill, so to speak, is just going to raise more opposition by various groups. So I think we need to keep it simpler rather than more complicated. That said, the current proposal, particularly in section K, is unfair in the sense that it discriminates between residents and non-residents. It's discriminatory in that regard, and it is unconstitutional. For those of you who are lawyers, I think you'll understand if you look closely at the Fifth Circuit opinion, which is the leading opinion currently, although obviously the First Circuit has yet to rule, but Fifth Circuit opinion is quite detailed and well thought out. And in that opinion, the bottom line is that state and local laws that discriminate against non-residents in the context of real estate rights and commerce are subject to constitutional attack and face a high burden to prove that the state, city, or county really has no other alternative. That's the key. There has to be another reasonable alternative before you can be allowed to have this kind of discrimination. So that said, I think we are taking an axe to a problem that needs a scalpel by simply saying that we're going to limit all non-residents to 4 rentals and all residents get 9. Not all residents are in need of affordable housing. I mean, as I understand it, the reason that for that distinction is to assist residents who are in need of affordable housing. It's also apparently an attempt to dissuade commercial operators from entering the market. Both of those, I think we have and can deal with in a very relatively simple manner. So the first, what I would do is we're already keeping the investors out of the market and helping residents in need of affordable housing by first, no corporate investment and limiting the SDRs to 1 per person. No rational business person is going to come into this market with the idea that 1 house is going to make them a killing. And obviously dealing with the corporate, cutting out the corporate investment is going to take a big chunk out of the investment market as well. As the issue of residents needing affordable housing, that can be dealt with very simply with the hardship option that we've noted in other contexts. If in fact there is a resident who, let's take a teacher for example, who needs to rent out more than 4 times a year, or whatever that number is. By the way, I think 4 is too low. I'll get to that in a minute. But whatever the number is that we or someone else decides upon is equitable for both residents and non-residents. If a resident is seen as it's a hardship to be able to afford housing on this island, then they can make their case. We need to keep in mind, I think, and I'm not hearing as much about this anymore as we did early on, that the local business community needs to be considered here. July and August, as we all know, is the key time for them to make their nut if they're going to succeed on an annual basis. So for us to be cutting back significantly And I know, we all, everybody's saying, well, this is grandfather, it's not going to take place right now. But that's not the way to look at a regulation like this. You have to look to the future. How is this going to be in effect, in place when it's fully implemented? And so that we are taking a position that will be seriously adverse to the local business community if we cut back on the STRs at the prime time when they help the local community make their as I say. The irony here, by the way, is that the year-round residents most in need of the ability for increase in short-term rental are the very ones in Section J who are we are limiting by where they're located. My guess is that those who are most in need are living in either already deed restricted housing or in townhouses or elsewhere. So that said, I think that we ought to do basically three things here. Make the STRs legal everywhere on island, as we've been saying, which is have a zoning bylaw so that we can cut out these lawsuits. That's a key. That is, for those of us who have been through these small group meetings, that is the leading, if not, one of the most leading arguments and concerns of local residents. They do not want neighbors suing neighbors. The second thing which we are saying we're going to do is cut out corporate ownership. Okay. And the third thing we're saying we're going to do is we're going to limit it to one person. And everything else should be equal and between residents and non-residents. And then if there's any special need in any context, the individual resident or non-resident can make a pitch to whatever commission or entity we set up to enforce it. And finally, and I apologize for taking this time, but as I said, I was not around that last week. I think, when it comes down to it, we hear a lot of gripes. When we hear gripes about the STRs, what we're hearing primarily is the noise, right? This noise and that noise. They got a loud party here. It's disturbing. And so the issue isn't so much the number of people on island in July and August. The fact of the matter is, that quote unquote problem has been on Nantucket for centuries. I mean, certainly for decades. I saw there was a letter that someone sent today. I think one of the residents, from the New York Times back in 1984, speaking to the very issue. I was told that there's an exhibit at the Historical Society, Nantucket Historical Association downtown right now that they're talking about the same issue in 1928. So the issue of too many people on island, et cetera, has always been with us. The issue of noise, that's probably been with us too. But to deal with that, what we really need to focus there is on the enforcement mechanisms. And that can be dealt with in a variety of ways. I don't want to take a lot of time dealing with that, but believe me, whether the police are not going to enforce it. What you can get, you use the money that we're creating, we're gathering here with all the registrations. Get the health department, whoever it is that's going to be running this, to hire civilians who are like our local police who don't have the summer cops who don't have arrest authority but have civilian authority, and they're the ones who are called to enforce a noise restriction where the police aren't. So there are a lot of different ways to deal with it. Bottom line here, less is more right now. Let's get something that can pass. I think what I just proposed can pass.
Thanks, Peter. Kathy?
Hi, just quickly, I was originally raised my hand to support what Dave was saying about requesting that the select board, convene this group or another group in the future to look at the data that's collected. The data is being collected for a reason. It should be looked at by the town or by some group to see those adjustments that need to be made. We heard very loud and clear from the other towns we spoke with that it's an incremental and evolutionary journey. I think it's responsible to look at what happens that's expected and that's not expected, to adjust the levers to however it works and let that group discover that. I think that, back to, something that Julia said about not having any, the zoning being a non-starter, what we're doing, I don't think it's fair to say that. I think that The accessory use has proven to be a non-starter because it has been voted down already. And I just think that one there is, you know, if you have to prove you have accessory use, then there's wiggle room in there for your neighbor to sue you. Say, no, it's not accessory use, and take you to the zoning board. And then, you know, all of that stuff starts up again, just with a different reason. So it also, I think the 1 week minimum, we've talked about that extensively. This was in her proposal that she sent out. As we all talked about, that really hurting the shoulder season. I think that what we came up with, which is the, you know, what we have now is addressing the churn. And then I think the seasonal cottages would run into problem with accessory use as well, because there is no way to live in those cottages, make it an accessory use. So those are just the things I wanted to say. And I also think that Peter has, you know, put some good thoughts forward for us to think about. Thank you.
Dave.
Yeah, I just want to repeat a couple things, and I won't bring it up again, but you know, that the suggestion that somehow off-islanders buying second vacation homes are more important to us as a community than having local people have a primary house that provides them with safe and secure housing is amoral at best. And anyone, and I'm just going to leave it at that. It really bothers me that to suggest that a vacation home or someone's ability to get a vacation home is more important than a human's right to have a primary house with safe and secure housing. And I'm not going to say any more on that subject. Second thing is the for contract piece is not about housing. It is about limiting or scrambling the math to make investor owned less appealing. And Peter thinks that we've solved that by a big chunk by outlawing corporations. Well, corporations are less than 4% of our total STR. So a big chunk of what? Like investors don't have to be corporations or big people. They just have to be one person who wants to speculate on the market, buy a house here, rent it all the time, never stay in it, cover his carrying cost for 5-10 years until the property appreciates, and then he sells it off. And what good is that for us as a community? It isn't. There's no bonus here for anyone. So I suggest the for contracts is not about housing. It is about investor-owned properties, period. And yes, may we experience a secondary positive thing out of it by housing? Great. But my concern is investor-owned. We cannot solve the affordability problem here, like many people have stated. I'm just going to go back to, if we don't create regulations that prevent unregulated growth of STRs, the majority of locals in town meeting will not vote for a zoning change. And I'm just going to say that. And if it comes out that we have to work on Julia's zoning article to make that work, then I'm not opposed to that. But I refuse to put, I mean, it's foolish. It's a waste of all our time to put a non-restrictive package together that does not protect from unregulated growth of STRs and then ask for a zoning change to promote that. And I'm sorry, but that really is the reality. I mean, the numbers, we've had anywhere from a 15 to 20% increase every first quarter on new registered STRs in the past 4 years. So to say they're not growing is nuts. The market shows we have too many of them already. So I just don't understand why we're so concerned about slowing the market down. Thank you.
All right, so it looks like we've got a lot of hands up. And it seems like we're just, I took down the bylaws that we're currently thinking about, because it feels like we're having a little bit more of a conversation about the principle of the matter, and I want to just let that play out for a little while. So Peter.
Yeah, I keep hearing Peter Kahn brought it up about the noise next door issue and about affordable housing. They're the two issues that really are non-events in our discussion. We said it from day one, this is not an affordable housing group. We'd love it if it was, but it's not, number one. Number two is on the noise complaints, I think we checked it out, and 2 years ago it was 30 complaints, or last year, 30 complaints over the entire season, and most of them were locals. People were complaining about, or people that buy a house behind the Brotherhood and then complain about the noise coming out of the Brotherhood. Come on, let's grow up. So I think we should get rid of those two issues because they're not relevant to what we're doing here.
Julia, I think you can go ahead.
Sorry, thank you. I'm gonna go back to, I have a question through you, Simonesh, or through Stacy to Dave Iverson. Dave, do you believe that the current proposal does prevent investor-owned STRs on Nantucket? Existing and new ones? Or how do you believe it's going to affect the situation?
So you mean future investment STRs? I think it scrambles the math, Julie. I think that if we say to them, they can only rent 4 contracts for the prime season, I think it makes it less desirable for them. I mean, I'm sure there's some that may see it and still work, but I really feel like it's gonna really take the wind out of their sails.
A couple of things that I thought were really interesting from the data that came out of Matt and what you said about the new STRs, that is really troubling that we're generating so many new STRs every year, despite the fact that, there's a slowing market and obviously we got saturation. Probably a lot of people put a lot of money in these properties because of the hopes that they're going to rent for a lot of money. And maybe it's not coming true, which is really disturbing, I think. I thought it was really interesting that a lot of the new STRs are actually coming from existing owners. Yeah, I don't know if anyone else noticed that. And I thought, it's really sort of telling in a way. If we're looking at numbers that, this is what we have, right? This is what we're working with. Then it seems like people who either they're holding on to homes longer than they would have. Maybe they're like, we don't go to Nantucket anymore. We would have sold the place. We'll hold on to it. We'll turn it into an STR because we can. Or we're building a garage apartment, might have been for year round. It's going to be an STR. Or I don't know, like there's got to be a bunch of scenarios, right? Of people who are existing owners who are being pushed towards this investment proposition, right?
Can I just, Julia, I don't want to interrupt you because what you're saying, but I think that part of the recent growth is the fear of the uncertainty of what's going to go on. And I think that people register to try to protect themselves in the future is part of those people that have owned for a while and are just registering.
I don't know that the tune of 300 a year or
No, I'm not saying they all are, but it
but
definitely
maybe a small portion of that. Yeah, maybe a small portion. I can appreciate that. But I guess what I see is, and this is just me when I look at this is, let's say a new investor, right? They would look at, there are different types of investors out there, but certainly the IRS is one way to look at it. As if I'm an investor, I look at the IRS code and I say, okay, the IRS gives me 14 days. I can be on Nantucket for 14 days as a vacation. That's what they give me. And I can still call the place an investment property and, deduct every expense that's related to it and get all the advantages. And so I think in the last probably 10 years, maybe a little more, maybe a little less, we've pushed a lot of even families who would never have considered purchasing a house on Nantucket to say, I would have just spent 2 weeks on Nantucket every year anyways. And I personally know people who've done this as well. I'm sure a lot of us do. And instead of just buying a vacation, going on your Vrbo or Airbnb and getting a vacation or calling a realtor for 2 weeks, they've purchased a home, and then they figure, I'm being told I'm going to rent it for, maybe 6-8 weeks in the summertime. I'm going to rent it in the off season a little bit. And in 10 years, I'll have a free house. And so your for contract idea is not only is the zoning not going to prevent any home from becoming 100% an STR, right? Your for contract on new buyers, if you're saying I'll use it for 2 weeks, I'll get 4 contracts. Maybe I get, a 2-weeker in there, maybe not. Ultimately, it's an 8-week season, and then I'm on the shoulder season. It's not very different than what we all started with, right? And I think that's, then you couple that with the zoning, which is, again, like any home anywhere can be an STR 100% of the time. And the general bylaws are not preventing that. So what I wanted to say to you, Dave, is I appreciate that you have a concern. And I think some of us are concerned, right? And so the question is, how do we get there? And so I just wanted to share this example of why, the zoning coupling with the for contract is maybe a different scenario than some people are believing.
I want to, does anyone want to follow on this exact point before we sort of go back to the queue that's specifically on, is the for lever, the for contract lever enough to prevent investment owned STR math to work? And I want to sort of let that follow on that for a second. Jim?
Yes, thanks. I sort of want to do both. I just
Okay.
want to start by saying I have the same concerns you've expressed, Julia. I think in certain communities, accessory use would work. But on Nantucket, we now have some lawsuits that have really scared people. They've been pursued aggressively, and I don't think accessory use will pass here. And the thing is, actions have consequences. When lawsuits are put out there and then supported by groups, people know that, and they need protection. I think accessory use can work in some communities. It's not going to work here. So we've had to try to do it through reasonable general bylaws. And we have to do it with the attitude of trying to make it work. I know, Julie, in your letter today, you wrote, let's not do what we're doing now, simply to say we did something. We're not doing that. We're working as hard as we can to make this work. I'm sharing a lot of the same concerns you have, but it's not going to work through accessory use. We've got to live in the community where we live. Now, onto the 9 versus 4. None of us, at least I'm not a financial expert. I think limiting contracts to 4 and high season after a sale will probably be a huge discouragement to potential investor-only people for investor-only STRs. And again, to Peter Kahn, the reason why we need that more than just corporations is there are people who are doing that, who are not corporations, but they're doing investor-only STRs. Now, I'm sensitive to the concern that Peter Kahn has. I'm sensitive also to what Dave said about the importance of year-round housing. And from my own point of view, I think if we put in a 5-year sunset, or whatever we want to call it, to allow the 4 go back to 9, it would solve a couple problems. One, long-term, it would not limit the number of rooms available, one of Peter's big concerns. And 2, to use the very wise words of John Delano, who's not allowed to speak during our meetings, but has written some wonderful letters, and with a great attitude too, John, thank you. But it would be more of a deferment than a discrimination. Now, why do we need that deferment? Because we cannot discourage investor-only STR investment unless we change it to 4. So that's the reason that's in there. As Dave said, it's not for housing, it's for that purpose. So yes, I think the 9 to 4 is a good clause. I think the 5-year sunset could answer to a couple problems. And I hope we'll all really seriously consider this, because this is one of our main issues. And I think it's a wise trade-off. I don't like the sunset clause myself. I'm willing to go with it. Thank you.
Peter,
Okay, sorry. Can you hear me? Yeah.
you're on, yeah, go ahead. We hear you.
Okay, thanks. Let me just pull up my notes here. First of all, I wholeheartedly agree with Peter Schaefer. I don't know whether he was trying to distinguish himself from me or joining me, but the fact of the matter is I agree that this is not an affordable housing issue at all. And as far as the noise issue, I was just sort of using that to say, hey, it's a throwaway. We can if that's someone in serious concern, that can be easily dealt with. So I'm in full agreement with Peter on that. As far as Jim's concern, I guess others are Dave's concern with regard to this investor housing. First of all, by the way, every STR owner is effectively an investor. So I mean, I don't know how you just how you're defining an investor as opposed to any other STR owner. People are using the STR to invest and make money. But putting that aside, by limiting. We talk about corporations, but by limiting it to one per person is putting a significant, giving you a significant impact on slowing down the growth of STRs. Right now, there is no limit, right? Anybody can do it for as much as they want. So you're already putting the brakes on it. To then say, okay, and we're going to do 4 for non-residents and 9 for residents. As we've talked about, is going to bring a lawsuit. You're going to have a lawsuit on that. It's just not constitutional. So if you want to do, we can have a whole discussion about 4 for everybody. I happen to think that's too low, but we can have a discussion about that. And as far as the affordable housing thing that Dave is concerned about, the fact of the matter is, if someone, take a teacher who is quote unquote limited to 4, let's say if it's equal to everybody, or 6, whatever we may decide, or 8. And if they can demonstrate that they need that extra income to make a go of it to afford their year-round house, then that's what this program is for, to have an opportunity for someone to make an economic hardship argument. But to put it in and say, okay, we're going to have a sunset clause, and therefore we're going to put the brakes on now, and then let's see what happens. That's not the way to do it. The way to do it is to say, okay, let's do these few things now. Let's see how it works. And then let's see if we need further fine tuning, if we need further tweaks. Because again, the more you load this up, the more you're going to create a situation where one group doesn't like it, another group doesn't like it. Less is more. I keep coming back to that. And that's my view.
Matt, was there something you wanted to share by way of data?
On mute. Matt, I think whatever you just said, you said on mute and then you stopped talking.
Oh, sorry. I said there have been moments, right? A few things I was going to clarify or add in, or where data would have helped. But I think at this moment, I'm going to return to mute, let you guys continue. Stacy, if you'd like me to weigh in line when people have data related things, just call on me.
Okay, yeah. I mean, Matt, the only thing I would say is to the question of is 4 contracts per year, like, do you have any sort of data on sort of the economic math around what the impact of limiting to 4 contracts in high season might mean?
Well, I'm gonna say a bunch of you probably have more real estate finance experience than I do, but I can tell you how many, if you set up parameters of a mortgage, I can tell you how many days they're going to lose. But there's a lot of variables in that question without giving me a parameter. What mortgage rate, what term, what's prime and how far am I, you know, and yeah, what range of price point. But I can do that fairly simply. And I think the question you guys should agree on first is, if it before I go down that exercise, is if it does limit people's interest in buying homes as an investment, decide if that matters. And if it matters, I can help you figure out where that line is, if that's what you want to achieve. But I don't want to give you just another point to pick sides of without it being important for you all to move forward on. If that's what you want, I'll do it though, for sure. I think that's very doable.
All right, thanks, Matt. Kathy.
Okay, back to the 4 lease cap, what Jim said, I think, but does make sense, and this was already something that we proposed with some sort of sunset clause, and agree that's not the best way to do things. But I think that gradually taking down the lodging stock with no floor in that, it just continually, you know, it's every year you lose another X percent of the properties, you lose the ability to do that, and so eventually you have less lodging available. So I think having a floor of some type, or looking at the numbers every year to see where they're going would be a useful tool. And as long as it's not discriminatory, I think that certainly works. That certainly works for us. I also, you know, bring up that I think you had mentioned it, Stacy, in some of the notes you had on the seasonal cottages. That would be, I think, a tough thing when those things are sold, if they can't be used for half the summer, and that's really all they're good for, are seasonal uses. So I think those are really important to keep in mind, and I think we need to be able to look at those numbers going forward, just to see where they go with it. And I think that there is a real difference between, obviously, the sharp jump in people registering their homes as STRs. I think that's largely not just a small number, they're largely grandfathering, reason for just to cover yourself for grandfathering, because those are not being turned into STRs and made available, because if they were, we wouldn't be seeing the big downturn necessarily in the rentals that we're seeing right now, which there could be any number of reasons for those things. But I think that those things going together really, there's availability of STRs. There's way more now than anybody wants or needs, because no one's renting them. So that'll soon become, you know, people, if that's what they're doing or attempting to do, maybe it'll drop the prices on them, which might not be a bad thing either. So those are my 2 thoughts on those topics. Thank you.
John.
Thanks, Stacy. So I'm probably going to repeat a couple of things, but this is our chance to put our point of view. So just starting with growth, leaving aside the registrations, but, you know, from Matt's data, the number of nights booked last year was almost 40% more than the average 2017 to 2019 before COVID started. So, you know, 40% over what, 3 years is significant. The NAREB report says that their leases were up 16-something% last year from 2021. So it isn't just about the registration, and I get the registration piece, but there's no doubt that growth is still happening. You know, just going back to what you said at the very start, Stacy. So, you know, all along the line, I keep asking myself, well, okay, how in the end are we all going to get to the middle? So I'm just going to tell you, in my own case, I have a lot of sympathy for what Julia is saying about yes in every column on the zoning bylaw. But I've come to believe that is okay, as long as we have a strong set of general bylaws that are going to put in real guardrails to make sure that as we go forward, we do have a way to put some brakes on SDR growth. So, you know, I've already made some compromises in my own mind of what I think is right and wrong. and I'll go with it. But at the moment, the guardrails are not there. They are not there. I think the 9 contracts to 4 is a very good step towards putting in a meaningful guardrail. So, you know, I'm all in on that. And, you know, I'll just say it, to the extent that reducing, you know, contracts from 9 to 4, if it de-incentivizes some future homeowners coming to the island and buying a seasonal home and renting it, if I've got to weigh that against providing an opportunity for some of our local people who, it's not about affordable housing, it's about attainable housing, the next level up in this, people, middle-income people getting a shot at buying a home. And all of the data, if I got to choose between those two, I am going to prioritize a small group of local people being able to stay on this island, put a roof over their head, and serve this community and us, whether we're seasonal or year round. You know, I don't need to reiterate all of Matt's data because you've got it. But if you look at the under 2 million, which houses that were sold in the last 6 years, under 2 million, which if we didn't live on this island is a bit of a stretch to call even attainable housing, but that is the reality of where we live. You know, off island, people purchased an average of 62 homes a year and registered 1/3 of them immediately as STRs. Local residents bought 50 homes a year, so, you know, similar kind of number, but only 1/10 of them were turned into STRs. And what that tells me is, you know, there is, people here can get started on the ladder if the housing stock isn't taken away from underneath their feet by people that are just buying them to be single investors. And I tell you what, it's not just the dwellings. It's about the same thing is happening with land. Land in what would have been traditional, local owned areas of the island. Those opportunities have gone. The land is being built, is being bought by developers to build 6-bedroom SDRs. So I'm, you know, for me, when I look at John Giorgio's latest document, I'm all in. That would get my vote today. But if we take out 9 to 4, no, I'm sorry. I can't vote for codification of the zoning STRs all over the island. I can't agree to the grandfathering thing as it stands. If we cannot give if we can't balance these scales a little more equal than they are, then it's going to be very difficult for me. So for me, it's all about 9 to 4, and it's all about giving a local exemption to those people. I would rather not have a 5-year sunset, sunrise, whatever we're going to call it. But if that's what it takes, I guess I could suck that up also. But to not have it at all, I'm sorry, that's not going to work for me. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to take Karen, I'm going to take your comment, and then I want to just put the slides up here and see if we can get more specific about if there are things people specifically want to change. I know some of you have mentioned that already. I do think having the conversation about the basic principles behind this is also valuable. So I don't want to stop that as we go, but I want to make sure that we are, I am capturing your recommendations in the specific proposals being offered. Karen.
Does Matt have something that he wants to add data wise before I go, or?
Yeah, I just had it looks like 10% of the last 200 registrations were second home. So I think it's a lower percentage than it is overall. I think I want to say it's 15 or more, but it's down to 10% of the last 200. So Peter,
Sorry, Matt, can you
sort of
just say that
referenced-
one more time?
Yeah, 10% of the last 200, 20 of the last 200 registrations that I have, and that was at the end of Q1, I believe, of 2023, were second STRs non-occupied. They fit the state criteria of that second checkbox.
Thanks.
Is
Meaning.
that a lower number? Is that a lower number than we've had before? Is that what you're saying? And what's the point?
You would reference that data point, so I wanted to provide it. It's lower than it is before, which I guess so. Perhaps in other words, what I'm suggesting is that's the ratio that are singles. So you reference how many people are buying duplicates, and does limiting, what is the impact of limiting to one? And I would say that's at the last 200, that's 10%.
Okay, good, thanks.
Thanks. And just to clarify also, because John Kitchener, you were giving numbers about the percentage of homes that had been bought by off-island addresses. And just to be clear, that information was, you're speaking of the under $2 million.
Yes.
Specifically. Okay.
Yes.
Just want to make sure that that's clear on the record too, because it may be, Matt, the numbers may be quite different if you look at all 1,500 homes that were sold in that time period.
Yeah.
Okay, Karen.
Okay. Well, first, I just want to say that I also am concerned about the increase of, STRs growing exponentially. And I think that everyone on the group is, and it's hard to see sort of language saying, oh, we all want STRs on every corner, because I just don't think that that's true. I certainly don't. I do think that it's important for Julia to have her say in talking about the specifics of what she wants to propose. I don't think the public that's listening has maybe seen exactly what she's saying. I have a lot of questions about it, particularly how principal use is defined and the idea that it would have to always be a week rental in January and August, meaning that I guess there could never be people renting for long weekends, that kind of thing. So, but I think it's important to maybe discuss that again so that, we know that it's had kind of a full hearing to consider that accessory use idea again. So as an off-islander, I also feel, Dave, that, it's absolutely, the year-round residents are the most important. And I agree that, they're more important than someone buying a second home. I have a sister who's an islander and know people as well. So I feel like what we've been doing is putting in layers to try to get to a point to limit the growth and the corporate ownership in particular. And so the natural persons and the one per and the 4 contracts, I feel like those are layers that are going to be barriers to people saying, oh, this is easy and I'm just going to go do it and I'm going to make a ton of money. So I'm hopeful that those layers can actually have an effect. I think that I hear very strongly, and I don't disagree that the 4 going to 4 for new folks is something that I think we need to do. My concern about the difference is if Peter Kahn is right and it could be considered unconstitutional, how do we design any kind of help for residents in a way that could be constitutional? So, for example, is it enough to have a sunset clause within that to say that we're not treating people differently? Otherwise, we're just opening it up for lawsuits, or is it enough to, would it be better? And I hate calling it a hardship exemption, but rather than a blanket statement that residents get 9, because I don't know that many residents can even use 9, but rather than having it be a hardship exemption, is there some way to frame it as an exemption that if people want to, they can apply for it? Just to get around the constitutionality piece, to me, seems important. I really think maybe before we end this, we should come up with some explicit proposals about how to go forward to measure this and keep data, and see what happens with all of the things that we do as we get the registry, all of that. I think there should be some ongoing group, whether it's us or some component of us or a different group, to kind of see what happens. And if it continues to explode, then, maybe caps is something we consider at that point, or whatever group in the future could consider. But maybe we even, for Stacy's point about, contingent agreements in the face of uncertainty, if we could even mention that somehow to say that, if these proposals don't serve the purpose we think they are, then the group that's going to be continuing could look at that. So, and one more thing as a data question for Matt. We looked at all the under 2 million and how all the qualities of that, how many formed STRs and so forth. But I think that we should actually look at the other end too, because that might address some of the questions about the people who have concerns about more of the mini hotels. Can we get data of how many of those are bought and then turned into STRs? Or I don't know how hard or soon that could happen. It may be for down the road, but that was just something that came up to me that I mentioned. Well, I have the floor.
Give me a minute, but I can do that on the fly. You guys should carry on, but I should be able to get you that answer.
All right. Peter, are you going to offer something different from what you have said so far?
Yes, I want to address. I was going to address John Kirshner, but let me quickly deal with Karen's point, and then I'll come to John. With regard to the constitutionality issue, which is a critically important, I think I'm glad you raised it again, Karen, because what we're going to do is invite a clear law. It would be unconstitutional to have a sunset provision. That would not resolve the problem. I do believe it would be constitutional to have a hardship option. And the reason I use that word, which you seemingly don't want to use, is because if you allow all residents to have that 9 option, then you're backing yourself right into the discrimination issue and hence the unconstitutionality issue. If people really need it for an economic boost, because there are many residents on island who do not need it as an economic boost. Okay, they can well afford whatever it is they're trying to do. The hardship will be constitutional. Otherwise, it will not. As for what John is saying, I look, if John and others are suggesting that we reduce the number to 4, okay, I can arguably live with that. I need to check, with my constituency, so to speak, but I can arguably live with that as long as we're not offering 9 to residents, except for under a hardship provision, or making any difference for residents. If we want to reduce, what you're really saying is you think and believe that reducing it to 4 will cut back on investor and growth, and it applies to everybody, and so then that's something that it would be quote unquote fair to everybody, and could possibly work. If that's what you're saying, John, I don't know. I couldn't tell whether that was what you were saying or whether you still wanted the 9 for the residents or not. That won't work.
No. So Peter, just to reply, it wasn't, but you know what? That's a good idea.
And that's something that, again, and I should say, whether the number 4 is right or not, I would like to hear. I think this group should hear from the local business community, and I guess I would appreciate hearing from is it Matt? I'm sorry, Matt on this. I mean, so the economic effect of reducing STRs and the number of people coming in to spend money in the primary months of June and July and August, that's something we should be able to quantify, or somebody should be able to quantify. And we ought to know that number and the effect on the local economy. Because it works both ways. On the one hand, you're worried about people being able to maintain their homes. You're also worried about people maintaining their livelihood.
Would you like me to weigh in on that, Stacy?
Go ahead,
Yeah.
Matt.
I haven't. So two things. One, addressing Karen's question, looking at homes sold from 2019 to 2022, there were 470 greater than 3 million across all addresses. In other words, Nantucket and non-Nantucket, and 26% of them are currently STRs. So, you know, not dissimilar. It sort of spans the range. I'm sure it's slightly off. I don't know all the numbers off the top of my head, but doesn't jump out to me as wildly different than the other numbers.
Matt, what do you mean? What do you mean non-Nantucket?
Last week, when I talked through some of the things where we started looking at mailing address as a proxy for owned by a Nantucket resident.
Okay, I understand.
Yeah.
Okay.
So just looking at all transactions that were arm's length greater than 3 million. And then the other, so addressing Peter's question. So last week I spoke about some stuff, and I'm trying to be careful to not make economic predictions, especially because we're talking in the midst of a market that's evolving and changing. And I think in this group we hear a lot of people bring up things that are harder to pin down and measure. They're sort of like ideas more than they're quantifiable. Like when we often refer to changes in the with regard to housing, and we'll talk about the economy, and I think we'd have to better define what the economy is. But in some of the information that I've pulled together and been looking at, I don't believe that the capacity of lodging through STRs will go down with restrictions because of the sale rate and the rate that STRs would be impacted by sales currently. And again, this is all data that comes from a pandemic, from the newest set of data that's only been collected by the state for 4 years. But at the moment, the rate of home sale that impacts STR licenses, depending on whether or not you grandfather in, doesn't seem to lower the number of contracts that are available peak season, because the number of new registrations outpace any loss. Again, that's based on the last round of parameters that you guys had set with 9 and 4, 9 grandfathered, 4 on new. But I don't see, if we're just looking at the economy as simply how many lodging sites are available, and I would add on top of that you'd also have to get into the fact that if it's not an STR, it's still owned by someone who likely fills it some percent of the time. So I don't see that as a lodging-based risk. In other words, and about 10% of the population in the summer, and again, that's rough, is in STRs. So if we're talking about a 10% change in 10% of the occupancy on the island, we're talking about a 1% difference. So I think I don't see that as something that jumps out at me as a major thing we have to go dive deep down the rabbit hole on, but we can frame a question related to impacts and people and answer it if you guys would like me to do that.
Yeah, and I think, Matt, you showed us that analysis that time last week, and I think if you add to that the fact we know that there are far more units registered as STRs than being used as STRs, right? We know that from the NARAB data, there's a very small amount of activity in many of these. Should the market require more units, there's lots of reason. I think, Matt, you're saying that the loss of sufficient capacity for tourist lodging should not be a huge concern given the package that the group is looking at. Right.
That's right. There's plenty of availability.
Right. But I think framing up these kinds of questions, because I do want to go back to Julia. I know we can go in here and we can debate this. I do want to make sure, and Karen, you asked for this as well, to really talk through further Julia's concerns about accessory use versus permissible use. And, you know, conscious of, Jim, your comment is like, yep, people are really mistrustful of that because they know that there's too much uncertainty. If I'm saying this right, Jim, there's too much uncertainty in the definition of accessory use that leaves them uncertain. If I vote for this thing, what happens to my neighbor? I don't know exactly how many days they are on the island. There's nothing in zoning that says accessory use means an exact equation of how many days you are in your house and not in your house. Those things are not set. And sure, you could say the ZBA and can figure something out, but nobody's going to know what it is. And even if they do, if people don't like it, they sue, right? So I do want to just go back to, let's make sure we really have had this discussion. Why do people not, those who do not support accessory use, why do you not support accessory use? And if you do, Julia, since you do support accessory use, can you assuage everybody's concerns about accessory use such that, you know, if you really believe, all those concerns are misguided, we really should, accessory use is really a wise solution and meets people's needs, right? Because I want to make sure that conversation gets to happen if people think it needs to happen.
Stacy, I mean, you're bringing this up because of our position. And I think what's really difficult about how this is all unfolding is that we're now being asked to have a discussion. I've been asking to have this discussion for a while now. We're now without our quote experts to talk through some of the options. And we're sort of left to talk about it amongst ourselves, which, as you've pointed out, it is a complicated topic. I mean, zoning is not, there's a reason we have zoning experts, and there is a reason why lawyers might have differing opinions on zoning. But I think that what has been so frustrating is that the town / we'll call it, you know, planning director, planning board, planning people who are the experts on zoning have not been part of these discussions to the extent that we've really talked about the accessory use as an option. We've sort of very quickly dismissed it. So I think in a way, I appreciate the sentiment of your of the dialogue of how we would have this dialogue. I think it's a really hard thing to do amongst ourselves without some of the experts in the room.
Yeah, I mean, I would only say that the experts have already weighed in quite definitively on this issue, right? Judy Barrett has said accessory to what? The law is not clear. There's no clear threshold. And
no, it was a bit of a one-way conversation, right? I mean, it wasn't a real dialogue.
But sure, but then you can respond, but she's not here. And if you think you would change her mind, that's a different matter. And again, I sort of wish you had said so, and we would certainly have been able to set up that dialogue, but we did have them present. They did weigh in, and at the time, you did not make a case for why they were wrong. That got them to think differently.
I think Judy has made the case pretty strongly that the town had a position, and so we were told that this because we wanted the quote legal protection. And
no, that is not. She may have said that, but what she said for why she was supporting it for this article was not that. She was supporting it for this article because accessory use was unclear. It did not provide certainty to people as to what that would mean and allow for them, such that if you want people to come in and vote for something, right, like just to point to the scenarios that Karen put out, was able to send to to John to get answers in response, and Judy also looked at those, right? And you can now say to voters, here is exactly what voting for this will mean for you, will mean for your family, will mean for your neighbors, will mean for your, right? And Judy's view was there is no way to do that with an accessory zoning provision. Do you believe that? Do you believe something different about that, Julia? Do you believe that
Yeah, I
there
think
is
it was much more
provide
nebulous.
absolute certainty to people about what this means before they vote for it?
I think it was a much more gray zone because she said I toyed with the two, and I don't want, look, she's not in the room. And again, I wish these conversations and work group meetings aren't as fluid as we would like them to be sometimes, right? We have to wait our turn and we get to say certain things. And I think I expressed some concern, but we didn't have a thorough conversation about it. Like, for example, the fact that over the last couple of years, yeah, we've seen 2 different accessory zoning articles come to town meeting, and they were different, right? And so to say that the town couldn't decide what the accessory use means, I think is a little bit off. What town council is advocating is that somehow the only way we're going to have legal protection is if we allow it across the board in our zoning. That's got a lot of people freaked out. And I think it deserves a lot more attention in terms of why exactly, because the advice that I'm getting is contrary to that, is saying that's a sort of not a good excuse, to sort of eliminate your zoning restrictions in the name of we just want to stop lawsuits. So, I think it's a bad excuse, but I appreciate that there are concerns, right? So anyways, I just, like I said, I've been asking for this discussion for a while, and I appreciate people are trying to have it now.
Yeah, so let me, Dave, this is directly?
This is kind of Julia oriented, and I don't want Julia to take this wrong, but I really wish that when we all said, hey, this isn't viable, that you brought forward, because I feel like you're stuck in this one position, accessory use. And I feel like there's a lot of other options similar, maybe, that could be put forward that would, inside of zoning, or maybe not, that would accomplish your goals. And I feel like you're just stuck on the one method, and you just keep on running into that wall with that one method, because I that there's some of us in this group that are sympathetic to what you're trying to achieve, but a lot of us have said this isn't the one. So, I mean, it's like when I wrote you the other day, just asking for other examples of how other communities of Mass have regulated through zoning since 2019. Like, that would be helpful to look at, and helpful maybe form a different way to do it. And so I think that's my problem with dealing with your side of the situation is it just doesn't seem to be flexible, and it makes it difficult for us to fall in line when there's a lack of flexibility. And I'm not attacking you, so please don't.
Well, so I mean, to be fair, Dave, like the first year, a long time ago now, but the first year that we presented something to town meeting, which is, people didn't even know what a short-term rental was back there. Frankly, neither did I, a short while before then. It was not a zoning article. It was actually a general bylaw, and it was a licensing program, and it had a maximum number of days, and it was sort of allowing year-rounders to do it on their own property, and then a maximum number of days for other folks. I think that, this group has been pretty intent on allowing all of the existing STRs, which is a pretty big, pill to swallow for a lot of folks. And, like as I mentioned, a lot of folks that I talk to who live next door to commercial STRs where no one ever lives. And I appreciate that this group may not, be close enough to the supporter group that I represent, that, they would be inclined to look at an accessory use, but it's the position, if zoning needs to be changed, is what, I think most of us have come to realize after Styler that we have to address it in our zoning. And that's the position, but it can be accompanied by general bylaws. That's not a question. Completely agree. And I think a lot of stuff belongs in general bylaw, whether it's a maximum number of days, number of contracts, like the group is discussing. But what Judy, I think, really, she helps. I think she helps a lot to understand how zoning is, like, simplifies it, and they have to tie together, right? Your zoning and your general bylaw. And if your zoning allows for it all, then your general bylaws are going to have to allow very broadly the use. And to come back later and start limiting, this or that, you're also going to have constraints. So I think, that's where.
If I could, one more question, Stacy, and then I wanted to ask Peter a question, if it's all right. Just so do you believe that if in any way we did not grandfather, either whichever way we do it, if you think we just took away a accepted use right that people have used for years, that they're just going to roll over and it's going to be okay?
No, I think that you'd have to allow people to do it to some extent. The question is what is the extent, right? I mean, that's been the position. I think that's been our position for a long time, is whether you're a year-round resident or a seasonal resident, you should have the right to do it. The question is kind of what you're toying with a little bit, like, should the year-rounders have a little more protection? Should, others maybe not have quite as much protection, and where do you draw the line? I think that's the question.
But in zoning, that is really the basis of pre-existing non-conforming, is protecting people that have taken place in an activity or use on their property, and then a law changes and prohibits that use. Their grandfather, right? So if we change people's ability to what they believe is a property right, which the rest of us will say is an accepted right, that there is going to be an incredibly large amount of lawsuits. So
I can appreciate that people would try, right? Because there's a lot of money at stake. However, without the bylaw actually explicitly mentioning STRs, it doesn't matter that the ZBA has opined here and there. That's not.
Yeah, I think there's gray area in there, Julia. I mean, I understand what
I understand we might have disagreement on this, but
yeah.
That is, I agree, Dave, that's also an area of, quote, uncertainty that's been difficult to deal with for this group.
Agreed. So I'm sorry, I don't want to hog this, but Peter, can you explain the unconstitutionality that you talk about? I just want to kind of, and maybe the group too, just kind of understand where you are there, because we treat a lot of people differently in some of our laws on this island. So I just want to kind of wrap my head around what you're saying when it comes to things not being constitutional.
Sure. What I'd suggest you take a look at is the decision of the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals from August 22nd, 2022, in the case of Hignell Stark versus City of New Orleans. And what I'm happy to do, I mean, it's a pretty lengthy and complex, discussion. But at the heart of it, it says, and as I said before, that state and local laws that discriminate against non-residents in the context of real estate rights and commerce are subject to a higher standard, that you just cannot simply discriminate against them. You have to have a rational basis to do, and it's got to be very tightly, it's got to be the most tightly, you have to have it very tightly drawn to get around it. The presumption is against it. What I'll do is what I can do is I've got a sort of a one-page summary that's for laymen that might be helpful. And I'll be glad to send that around to Semenish, and maybe she can pass it on to the group, and you'll see. But
Yeah, and
the best way to do it is to take a read to
But
read.
it's
through them.
fair to say that that was based on a complete shutout of non-Louisiana residents, right?
No, it had dealt with the city of New Orleans and whether or not, in the context of that, you had to be a resident of New Orleans or not to be able to
Yeah,
take
so
advantage of
a
this.
complete
And there were-
shutdown. Yeah.
Well, yeah, but it wasn't. But you're trying to, yeah. But I think the distinction you're trying to make there is not a valid one. There are. Whoops, I'm losing you here. It was not as simple in black and white as that. It was. This was not a narrowly drawn. It was not a narrowly drawn regulation. There are a lot of similarities to what we're dealing with here that
So-
would make it a prime target for a lawsuit. And I think.
You think that applies to the carve out only? Is that what you're suggesting? The carve out?
No, anything that would discriminate. Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing that right now, I mean, I think the only thing I can see right now that distinguishes between groups is the carve out. You talk about the 9-4. Is that what you're talking about? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that I would take a closer look, but
I just want to understand that. I mean, because
that's why I suggested that maybe I might be willing to work with you on where you have a across the board number, right? And then where you could claim for if a resident had a hardship, that needed a few more opportunities to rent, right, or to have contracts, that might be narrowly enough drawn.
I would urge you, Peter, to choose words carefully, because you have to remember locals are the ones that we need the votes of. So
Hold on a second, Dave.
No, I don't mean that
very carefully. No, we have to be very careful here, because the fact of the matter is we ought not to have to pass a law or a regulation that's bad just because we think that's what's going to be accepted.
that's not what I don't believe
that.
that either, Peter. I don't believe in that. I'm with you. I know how locals are, and their hair comes back up on their back easily. So
No, but this gives them an opportunity. This gives them the opportunity, if they need it, to have it. Okay.
it does.
so I just want to be, just to close this, right? I just put up on the screen John Giorgio's comments about that particular lawsuit. It's a Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. They are, as he mentioned, the most conservative circuit in the United States. The First Circuit is the often least conservative circuit. I know, Peter, you are
This is not a conservative versus a liberal issue. This is not a political issue in that context. I think it's very unfair to argue that, Stacy. This is not a political.
I am just sharing what we heard from our legal advisor, who said
that has nothing whether he says it or not.
It is purely speculative to know what the court will do about this issue. That is his
all I
view.
said was it was a well written and crafted opinion, and I urge everyone to read it and judge for themselves. But to bring politics into this is a mistake, and I think it's just the wrong way to look at that decision.
I think that all we can say about this matter is that it is unknown. What would happen in this? It has not been determined in a way that is definitive to.
That's true. But
therefore, it is unknown. Therefore, it is unknown. And that's all I am saying.
It's unknown, but there's a rational discussion about it that people ought to read.
We're done with that topic. That is.
You say so.
Sorry if I started that fire.
Yes.
Yeah. Jim.
Thank you. I did want to go to the 9-4, but first I want to say to Julia, I do feel I've been trying to reach out to you last week. I really think we have a lot of the same concerns. We're trying to do it a different way because we don't think accessory use will fly on Nantucket. And I do believe that Judy said basically she had doubts about not doing accessory use, but she decided in the end we can't use it. But we're not trying to disagree with you. I have a lot of the same concerns, and that's all. I really want you to know that I mean that. But I want to go back to this 9-4 and to not exactly whether Peter's right or wrong. I mean, he's a respected lawyer. I certainly acknowledge that, and I don't know anything about it. But I want to try to open the window on that discussion a little bit. So I've been thinking maybe a 5-year sunset could bring us all together. Okay, maybe it won't. I don't know. Maybe it still will. But I want to get there, guys. I want to get there to 7.2 or 8.1 at least. Is there some way we can do this so-called hardship waiver that's, I mean, that's pretty yucky. If you live here and it doesn't matter where you live, but to claim hardship, I mean, we have people's self-respect to think about. I mean, I know a lot of people with self-respect have hardship. I'm not saying that, but it's difficult for people to break through that membrane between, hey, I can do this or I can't do this because I need a hardship waiver. I'm asking the collective wisdom of the group. Is there some other phrase that could be used? Is there some other way to not just pitch this, but to express it that would be more, I don't know what the term is, user-friendly, I don't know, more respectful perhaps, but is there some way we can do it? Can we find that? And would that be a way for us to start to agree on this? So I don't know the answer. This is a question, collective wisdom of the group. Let's find some way to do this.
Does anyone want to speak specifically to that point before I take those in line?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead, Peter, then. Go in order.
Oh, who, me?
Didn't you say yes?
Yes, okay.
And you're
and
next in
you.
line, so I'm going to you.
Okay, I agree with Jim. I think we have to do something. We have one issue here that's segregating the group, and we were pretty much together prior to this issue. I'll go back to the thing that I suggested originally, was some sort of sunrise or sunset clause that clicks in at 5 years, whether it's a slowly rising or it comes in all at one time, doesn't make any difference to me. But if you have to wait 5 years before you can make the money on your house, plus the fact that prices aren't going down on Nantucket. Okay, they might stabilize, but they're not going down. And the economics of building a house and renting it, based on what we're seeing this year, and I think what's going to go forward, it's not going to be as lucrative as it was. So I think we should start looking towards figuring out some way to develop a sunrise or sunset clause that we all feel comfortable with, at least most of us feel comfortable with, and go forward with that. That's it.
And sorry, Peter, but are you saying, what was your comment? Was that and have no exemption or no hardship waiver?
No, this would just be for I don't like hardship waivers because we don't have enough people, enough cops in this town, never mind committees, to listen to people, tell them how they don't have any money or they need a benefit or whatever. I think we need to have it written into the proposal, and it should be a set period of time, at 5 years or whatever, you get the rights that everybody else has. Maybe it will be different in terms of timing, but I think it's up to the group to come up with something there. But I think we should really look at that, because I don't think this going back and forth and bickering about it is getting us anywhere.
John?
Stacy, I don't like the sunset, sunrise, whatever, but I absolutely would stand shoulder to shoulder with Peter Schaefer. I hate the idea of putting my neighbor into some kind of hardship, means testing situation. You know what? I left England 40 years ago because of stuff like that. And this is the United States of America. We do not do that to our neighbors. And I could never vote for anything like that. I think 5 years is the right number. It's enough to disincentivize people that are just going to do it, buy something and then rent it. It's enough. I just would like to see the 5 years, and I would like to see an exemption for year-round residents without the whatever the word is, to humiliate them to go through something like a means test. I left that behind me a long time ago. Thank you.
Sure, Peter?
A sunset clause is not going to pass muster on constitutionality because you know, 5 years, it's not sufficiently narrowly drawn. If you want to, I'm happy to sit down with Jim or anybody else. It's hard to do it in this kind of context, to come up with a descriptor that will soften the proposal. But I think I just saw for that John Donner passed a note saying residential accommodation exception. I mean, the bottom line here is it's going to be an exception, you know, because there's no rational basis. There is no rational basis to give this to all residents, many of them who don't need it. Okay, and to discriminate then against the non-residents, just to you know, you're admitting it's discrimination at that point. We can come up if somebody really needs this, we can come up with it, and that's all we're talking about. We got a descriptor that doesn't make them feel bad. We should be able to do that. But you're walking yourselves right into the issue of the Fifth Circuit decision of discrimination between residents and non-residents, and something that we, by the way, we as a group held dear until June of this year. I mean, I must say it's kind of surprising that from November until June, we were all everybody said that as a goal that there would not be a discrimination between residents and non-residents. And I don't need to go back into all the who struck John on that and why it's important that we be treated fairly, but that everybody be treated fairly. But here it comes down to a descriptor. We should be able to do that. And I'm happy to sit with Jim this week and come up with it. But a sunset clause is not going to do it, unfortunately.
Aaron?
Is it enough to not put in the language that residents automatically get the 9, not the 4? Instead of putting it in that language, would it be enough to say that residents could apply for an exemption? So it's not like a blanket thing, but they would apply for an exemption solely based on the fact that they're residents and want to do it and have nothing to do with means testing. Is it possible that that could work?
No, there has to be a rationale as to why they need it. Why should residents be treated differently than non-residents? Okay, there's, you know, it can't be based on a simple fact that one's a resident, one's a non-resident. That's not enough. That's what the New Orleans decision made clear.
Okay, so is there, because I think people are not just concerned about the name, they're concerned about having to prove somehow that you need it from a means standpoint. So could it be based on, I'm not going to be in my house, I'm a resident and I'm not going to be in my house for longer than or something, I don't know, like.
Dave?
Yeah, a couple things. I like Karen's idea that maybe just you need to apply. Listen, you know, Peter, I pay a different tax rate than you do.
It doesn't apply to tax. We're talking about real estate and commerce. We're not talking about
real estate tax.
No, the case law is clear on that. That's a different issue.
I think that it would be very easy to draw a rational nexus to the cost of living on Nantucket and the need to rent for a local. I think that is a rational nexus that could easily be drawn. And I'm not going to sit here and argue about being equal. Again, like I said in the beginning, you know, being equal, it's not equal because second homeowners are trying to be equal with primary homeowners is not equul. You guys, this is a primary house, John, Pete, let me just finish and then I welcome it. But so however we do it, I think that Karen's idea was great. The residential exemption for taxes you need to apply for. So it's just simply applying. I feel strongly like John does and like other members of our board that this shouldn't be a shame contest and they shouldn't have to bring in their tax returns and show that they have to do it. It should be as easy as the residential exemption in taxes. You apply for it, prove that you live here 6 months and 6 months and a day, you're local, and there you go. Thank you.
Can I just jump in? Could it be that you're a resident and it's your primary residence
I
would
think
be
it would-
enough?
Yes, I think so, Karen. At least I feel that way. I know Peter doesn't agree with us, but
Well, I agree with Karen.
Tom?
Yeah, when John was originally writing up the zoning bylaw and the general bylaw, isn't this exactly the reason why this first section of purpose and intent in provision 1 is included in there? Was to cover the basis for whatever provisions we may or may not include, and then they were fleshed out loosely, and now they're now they've gotten further along. And also on provision M, the so-called hardship provision, that is not, or my reading on it was not necessarily the intent would be, oh, well, there'd be this body and residents or whoever would go to them and say, oh, well, you know, here's my tax returns and here's what I'm making and I'm providing for this would be to cover unforeseen consequences in situations where, okay, somebody owns 4 cottages and, you know, all these kind of specific Nantucket situations that we've had here for hundreds of years that may not be covered in this zoning or general bylaw. I don't think the intent of this hardship provision was for folks to go to that body and apply for a hard. And I can tell you, working at a nonprofit that deals with a lot of confidential information on food, fuel, rental, and medical travel assistance, that handling those documents, and we're not even a public body, is very time-consuming, delicate, diplomatic, all the adjectives you can think of. And I don't, to Peter Schaefer's point before, I don't think you'd want an all volunteer or even professional staff, if there was in the town, to put that on them to make those calls, and they may be highly subjective. So anyway, to throw all that against the wall, hopefully we can come out to some sort of resolution on that.
Kathy, you want to weigh in on this point?
Just real quickly, I'm sorry, my video is not working. I'm not trying to not appear here, but you can hear me, right?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, so that's still working. So just, I think just tossed one thing out there, that one of the things that John Delano sent to all of us was a residential accommodation exemption. Maybe we can talk about that one. I don't know if it's legal, not legal, whatever, but that's another thing to talk about. And then back to what Dave said about the residential tax exemption, and then why that's different than what Peter Kahn was talking about as far as property rights, is the homestead exemption is a well-defined and well-accepted provision of the law in most states, so that you get a lower tax rate if that's your primary residence. And that's very different than what the rights are that you have with your property. So that's why that one's allowed, and it's allowed in Massachusetts. It's allowed where I live in Pennsylvania and in many other states as well. So it is a little different. And I don't know if the one that John Delano posted is really something that we can talk about or not, but I just wanted to throw that out there. That's my understanding of the difference there. Thank you.
Yeah. John?
Yes, just quickly, Stacy. So, John Delano's suggestion of calling it a residential accommodation exemption, that sounds like a very good idea. But shouldn't we kind of fairly soon put a stop to this until we've got John Giorgio in the room with us? Because I feel like we have our own lawyer needs to weigh in on this, because until I hear it from John Giorgio's mouth, I'm not accepting that this cannot be done. So I hope we can quickly engage him tomorrow, Stacy.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I have to look for when he gets back from Europe. Does anyone know?
I heard it could be as long as a month.
That was my fear, is that we might not have him back in sort of, he is responding to emails with a delay, God bless him, but he is not going to be able to engage in a call until he is back.
Why not?
Yeah, why not?
Well, that is what he told me.
Well,
That's ridiculous. You know,
it
we
is
all,
ridiculous.
Could we ask him for his opinion, Stacy? Could you write
can.
him an email and ask him for his opinion and have him send that to us at least? Because a month is way too long. I think these are important issues and.
Stacy?
Yeah,
Also, obviously, KP Law is a very large law firm. I'm sure there are several very qualified other lawyers in his office to weigh in on such an issue.
Great.
I will send him the question. And the question I am asking him is, if the group wants to find a way to allow an exemption for residents to purchase a house and have more than 4 contracts allowed per year. Do we want to ask him, A, does he have legal concerns about that exemption? And B, is there a way of framing it or designing that exemption that is as justifiable and rational within the laws as possible? Is that the frame?
it's just July and August. It's not the year.
In July and August?
Yeah.
Is that the right question?
I think so.
And I guess
Okay.
whether it would be opt-in or not, like on the tax registry, you have to claim your 14-day. And with the steamship, you have to prove you're on the street listing and things like, I don't know the exact mechanism, but what he thinks would be the way to make it active.
Yeah,
And I think you need to stay in light of, you know, the Fifth Circuit decision and other circuits decisions.
yeah, I think he's aware of that.
Well, I'm
Well, that's
sure he is.
because
And,
The
and
Fifth
those other things, the steamship authority and so forth, those are, I mean, in the High Line or whoever offers those discounts, those are companies, they can do whatever they want to.
I
we're
just
talking
saying,
about taxes.
very true, Kathy. I was just saying in general.
Okay,
Maybe you could search, Jason, why don't you circulate the question, everybody can comment on it, and then, you know.
yeah, okay, will do. I will do that after this or probably tomorrow. Okay, so let me go back to our, do people like my slides better or the actual text of the bylaw for discussion purposes? Do you have a preference?
Doesn't matter.
Slides.
But this is too much print.
Yeah, I found the slides a little easier, even though we know they're not quite as detailed. Let me put that back up then.
I think the only concern there, Stacy, is they don't have the exact wording, and this is a law, so you kind of have to have the exact wording. to
Well,
understand.
you all have the exact wording,
Right.
but what we're talking about right now are the concepts.
Got it.
To the extent you all want to suggest changes, we send those to John and John puts them in the right language, right? So let me go back through this. I think the things in purple, we got a clarification from John about the language. So this language might not be quite right here. But his language tried to clarify this question of property and dwelling and unit to get that right. He trying to find that that document he sent me. Oh, he just said that it would say that an owner may register to operate one or more dwelling units in a single registration, as long as all dwelling units covered by the registration are located on the same lot and are rented to the same person or legal entity. With that change to the first clause, clause H, comments or suggestions or et cetera. Jim?
2 comments on this. One, I think it's trying to cover two different things, and one of them may be the so-called seasonal cottages that have been brought up before by Julie and others. And my sense is that it would be useful to put the seasonal cottages in an exemption in the same way we did with hosted stays. I know we'll have to define what a seasonal cottage is, but a group of, separate I don't know how to define it, but I think it can be done. It's separate cottages that are rented to different people, because this thing would mean all the cottages would have to be rented to one person, which of course can't happen. So I think we need to exempt them, put them to the side, just as we did with hosted stays. It's a suggestion.
Johnny, Jim, are you talking about people that have 4 or 5 cottages on their property and rent them out? Or are you talking about somebody who has a cottage here, somebody else has a cottage there?
No, I'm talking about these, I can't remember the names of the groups. See, we see cottages when you drive out this road or that road, and there's like 4 or 5 different cottages owned by the same owner. And we don't want to.
That's considered a hotel, in my opinion.
No,
So,
well, can we have Dave talk? I think he knows this more than I do.
And I don't have the proper term, but in other towns, they have carve outs for what they call, it's not cottage community. It's like something they call those, multiple cottages on a property that have a tradition of renting. Corkish cottages, there's some other ones in Wisconsin, I think, and they have specific carve outs with that language that protects them from that bylaw. And I think just a very little bit of research and we could find it. I think Barnstable actually has or proposed a carve out for them, and I think there's some other towns in Massachusetts, and I forget the term they use. It's not cottage community, it's cottage something. So
David,
wouldn't bed and breakfast fall and do the same thing?
what was no
A bed and breakfast?
it's not a bed and breakfast.
Dave, it's
Yes.
cottage colonies.
That bingo, that's it.
Cottage colonies. Okay. And are these all, can I just get a sense from people? Because now I put that down here, Jim, as an exemption with hosted stays by based on Kathy's suggestion. So I want to check in with everybody if you guys are all comfortable with that. And if cottage communities, is that what you said?
Colonies.
Colonies.
The Barnstable definition that
and-
was sent around today.
And is a piece of that they are not winterized, for example, like that they are seasonal only? Because they could just put they could use cottage colonies and they could put a definition, but the definition, I wanted just to confirm with people that all of the ones you want to address here are seasonal, therefore not fit for year-round residential living.
Some of them might have heat. You can't segregate them that way.
Yeah.
But you want to protect those anyway. You want to carve those out anyway.
I think we need to look at other towns' definitions of cottage communities, because I think those other towns have way more of them than we do. And I think that would be helpful in forming that definition and the policy surrounding them.
I think there are 2 kinds here. From what you just said, Stacy, I just want to understand. There's the cottage colony that David's talking about, where there's a group of them on a property and that's all they're used for. And that's one thing. What about the cottages that are just, a cottage on a property and it's only a seasonal cottage? Would that fall under the same definition, or do we have to define 2 different things?
I would think we want to do the colonies.
If it's one cottage, would that be a resident on a piece of property?
Yeah, but it's not something that could be a year-round. Its only use is, like the North Wharf cottages, they flood in the winter. The ones out in Sconset, there are a lot of cottages, there are single cottages that are not winterized, and they're only used for rentals in the summertime, because that's the only time they're habitable.
But what are we doing to restrict those at this point?
Don't want to restrict them, just want to permit them as not having to, if you buy, for example, you buy the next owner, the new owner of a cottage in Sconset or wherever, they buy that cottage, so they're a new owner. Now they can only rent 4 weeks, the 4 lease cap applies to them. Okay, so I think that shouldn't apply to them. Those individual cottages that are not year-round usable. They're only used for vacation rentals.
I don't agree with that.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of the colonies in this case. I think the other one is sort of like a small house and maybe wouldn't. It's not what I'm trying to address anyway, and suggesting we tease this one out a little bit.
Okay, well, I think I'd like to address the others too, all these little traditional beach cottages sitting on the beach. And if you make it so they can't be rented during the summer, which is the only time they're useful, then that means, you know, who would buy them except someone who wants to tear them down and put something else up? So
How
I
many
think
of them
a
are
seasonal, sorry, but a seasonal resident might want to live in it for 4 or 6 weeks and rent it out for 4 or 6 weeks.
and they might need to rent it in the summer and come in the off season because that's the only way they can afford it, to keep it in their family. So I don't know that how those seasonal cottages are hurting anybody or providing or making it so that those folks, so that you know, they're not hurting the year-round owners, because a year-round owner can't live in it year-round anyway. And these are really the traditional cottages that we talk about protecting traditional vacation rentals. These are the kinds of things that people think of, that little beach cottage. It's all, you know, traditional. It's not modernized. It's got, you know, doesn't have interior walls. That is its purpose, is to house people in the summer.
How many of those exist on this island?
They do.
How many?
How many he asked?
I don't know, but don't you want to protect them?
There's
Well-
plenty, but you're making two different arguments here, Kathy. You're saying, well, the family won't be able to afford to keep them. Well, if they've been in the family, they're going to be grandfathered. So that takes that problem right off.
Right.
the table.
Right, and then you sell it,
Secondly,
and then
well,
you
then
sell
you
it.
sell it, and the
Sell it.
person that buys it knows the rules going in. It's not a
Correct.
surprise to them. We're not changing the rules halfway through the game. These are our new set of rules that you have to abide by.
But what are you incentivizing that new buyer to do? It's now
To
the less
use this
valuable
house and
property.
rent
You're
it.
incentivizing them to tear it down and build something modern.
I don't agree with that. Why? Why does that incentivize that?
Because that's how you can make money.
They're going to be limited to 4 contracts. So they're going to spend more money and still be limited to 4 contracts.
Or there would be a wealthy person who wants to put up a great big house. I mean, you're not going to be able to keep it in its current use.
There's no protection from that through what we're doing, preventing someone from buying a cottage and building a big house there. That's not our purview. That's
But
not
we
what
shouldn't
we're
be incentivizing it, which is what we'd be doing.
not incentivizing it.
Jim?
Could I go back to my 2 suggestions for,
Yeah.
okay, so, and Kathy, I understand what you're saying and I see the validity, but I'm going for colonies on this one. My second comment is just probably like a layperson reading legalese. I'm worried that the way that this is written, although it may be elegant in a legal sense, that people are going to look at it and think, oh, I can register more than one dwelling, you know, and I just think it should be in 2 different sentences. It says H, an owner may register to operate 1 or more dwelling units, like, whoa, wait a minute. And then it does say in a single registration, as long as all dwelling units are on the same lot, etc. But originally, I'm thinking maybe we should have 2 sentences within H. And obviously, I'm not a lawyer, and Peter and other people will know much more than me about this, but originally, let me go back to June 7th. In H, it was very clear, and then we could go on to explain it. It said an owner may register to operate only 1 dwelling unit as a short-term rental. Okay, that's what we had in June 7th. Okay, that's clear. Then I think, couldn't there be a legal sentence that says something like, however, if more than 1 dwelling unit exists on the same lot, the owner may register to whatever, blah, 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 do both of those. I'm sorry, I know blah, blah, blah is not legalese, but an owner could register both, you know, to operate both of them as long as they're rented to the same person. I'm just saying 2 sentences because I'm worried that people are going to be confused by this. You know, so keep the first sentence the way it used to be on June 7th, and then add another sentence to explain more than 1 dwelling unit on a single lot is my suggestion. I don't know if that makes sense to legal counsel, but it's something I would hope we would do just for the sake of clarity.
Okay, But Jim, you're, just so that I'm clear, you are comfortable with the principle of it. You just would like to make the language more clear.
Yeah, well, I'm not entirely comfortable with the principle of it, but I know Karen has strong feelings on this and I respect her and I'd like to hear from her on that.
Karen?
So I think that the new language and I agree, Jim, that I think that the point of it was we were trying to say you can only have one and that got lost in the shuffle. And so maybe putting you can only have one and then the next sentence. But I think, I sort of got really down a rabbit hole looking at all the definitions, and the state definition is by property. You register by property. And then the Nantucket thing so far says that you register by dwelling unit. So I'm thinking there's going to be a lot of confusion about all of this anyway. But I think on the one hand, the idea is that we want to limit to one, except that properties that have potentially two places on one property could, I think that's what this is trying to get at. The renting to one, as long as they rent to one person, I guess I'm not quite seeing the difference between an extended family renting, an extended family owning and using two places. And then the next week, a large extended family is rented to in total, and they use the two places. And then if you have two different people in two places, I'm not sure I totally see the difference. And so I was wondering about a tweak of, these would all be subject to the 4 or 9, I guess, if they were existing new. What about saying that the number of contracts applies to the property, not to the dwelling unit for this one? Something like that. So it would
So
limit
then
the total number of contracts.
So then
to
you're
the-
suggesting, Karen, that like, let's say somebody has a property with 3 units, they could rent to 3 different families 3 times. If
Well,
if it's a
I
9.
think 2, at one point we were tossing around 2, and I don't mind limiting it to 2 even, but I just was thinking that you would say that, like, let's say you have 2 things you can rent, that they get a total of 9 or 4 contracts total. So one week they could rent this one, the next week they rent this one, the next week they rent all together. So that is 3. And then maybe, well, then we're over, but so it still would be quite limiting. But then the next one week they get to have 2 different families on one as part of their 9 contracts or 4 contracts. Just, is that too complicated? Does that?
I'm just wondering if so-called grandfathering, what we're suggesting, will solve most of this, because people will already.
Yeah, I think it'll solve most of it for existing, for sure. So I can live with this. I just think it's adding on another way that people who are renting have to take into account the jigsaw puzzle of trying to get their 4 contracts to work.
Yeah, I would suggest, I think, Peter Kahn, to the extent we can do it, less is more is a good idea. I think we should simplify the language if we can with the 2 sentences. And you said it, Karen, better than I did, but then just let grandfathering take care of it, because otherwise we won't even be able to explain it. I mean, you explained it well,
So
but I know
what
I
that would
didn't.
mean is any new families would have to, they'd have to find people who could rent both at once or rent one or the other.
Probably, yeah, although
Yeah,
maybe
okay.
with different owners, I'm not sure how that would work. But I don't know, yeah.
And then just like, if this said an owner may register to operate only one property, and then it can say that property could contain up to 2 dwelling units, as long as, is that what you wanted to say? Because I think we can ask John how to do this, but you can't say that they can operate only one dwelling unit, register only one dwelling unit, and then say they could actually operate more than one. So you have to
I
have
think
a,
the way he has it is, he did it, he said they could obtain a registration for, as opposed to a dwelling, they could register a dwelling unit in
One,
his language. Yeah,
one property maybe, which could contain
yeah.
dwelling units.
And I think that would be more consistent with the Massachusetts registry too, which uses the language of property.
I think that makes sense, and we should just ask John Giorgio about that to make it the best possible way.
okay. Jim, did you have something else?
No, that's it. Thank you very much.
Dave?
Yeah, kind of related. I just wanted to throw this out here. This is Barnstable's definition of a cottage colony, and it probably won't work for us because in Barnstable, I don't think they have secondary and tertiary dwellings. So we would need to tweak this to work for us, but their definition is a group of 3 or more detached dwellings legally in existence at the time of the adoption of this ordinance, located on a single lot, which are customarily occupied on a seasonal basis. So that is Barnstable's definition of a cottage colony. Clearly, we'd have to do some tweaking, but I don't think it's out of the realm. We could make the definition 4, and then that would take away the secondary tertiary conflict maybe. So I don't know, but just throwing it out there because I do think that that's a group of people on the island that need to be protected, that need that use protected. It's been historical, as Kathy says. So yeah.
Peter?
Yeah, I just, I think I may have come up here with John Delano's help here, a way around the 4-9 issue where we would, and let me just throw it out here while because I do see it on the chart here. In lieu, because I am concerned that the sunset provision, I think, is going to cause significant constitutional problems. So in lieu of a sunset provision or means testing, which I understand, obviously people are concerned about, John has, if one takes a look at paragraph numbered 2 in John Delano's suggestion, he says, eliminate the distinction between voting and non-voting taxpayers. This is the 4-9, by restricting all new purchases to 4 contracts. By the way, that that number 4 we can discuss. That's still open as to how many it should be, but assume for the moment 4. But allow for, he says, an exemption, a residential accommodation exemption based on the purchase price of the home as defined by the select board. Now this ties back into what Robin Nyes was saying. I mean, if you set a number at 1.8 million or some low number, which is what you're concerned about. Again, it's the people who have bought in at that level who arguably need the assistance. That's where you're going to be able to narrowly construct the exemption, not require them to come forward with tax returns or anything. It's just based on the sales price of the house. I don't see a problem with that. I saw Dave Iverson going, waving. But go ahead. I mean,
My concern, Peter, and you might be able to answer this or not, is that at odds with Massachusetts fair housing laws when you're creating policy based on house price?
I'm not a housing lawyer, but I don't think that's a problem with it in this context. I don't think it is, but I mean, obviously, if we can let's get a viewpoint on housing from a housing council. But I think it's a nice way around. I think it's a nice way around the issue of of means testing.
Other responses to that, Jim?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I do want to open this window and talk about this, Peter, and we may get somewhere. I'm not sure this is the answer because I feel like this would have the opposite effect of what we want. I think this would encourage people to buy less expensive homes and turn them into STRs because they could do 9. So in other words, so it would tend to turn the lower priced homes into STR only homes because they would be purchased by people wanting to invest in them and get their 9. So I understand the thinking behind it. There's some nice thinking behind it, but I'm afraid that it would have the opposite effect. And that's my concern with this. But I still want to keep the window open. I think we can get somewhere with this. Thank you.
So I just want to check in. Is this the one provision, the 4 versus 9, how we deal with residential exemption, or if we do, and is there a sunset? Is this the one area that we still are that we're sort of basing support on the overall package, right? Is sort of hinging on this, and we're trying to get this right? Or are there other, I do think there is a question, if there were a hardship waiver, we've gotten most of the town bodies saying not it. And so I do think that's another, unless it's a automatically granted if you apply, I think there's really a question beyond the question of making people the hardship of asking for a hardship waiver. There also seems to be a lack of interest among town bodies to be the body to which people apply for that waiver. You know, but this sort of still goes with the 9 and 4 question. Is there, I think this other question, John Giorgio had a different suggestion, which was hang on, let me put it in here, which was within 60 days of the town's establishment of the rental registration program, whichever is later. If this was the question of if the system is not up and running by the time this bylaw takes effect. And I don't know, Megan, if you had any updates, if you've heard from anyone about the timing for when that registration system is going to be up and running. But anyway,
no,
there,
sorry, I was on mute. It just took me a second. The last
Yeah.
I spoke to Roberto, it was supposed to be the end of this month, but that's something that is really with the health department, not with the planning department. So I'm not actively involved with the rollout of that program.
yeah, okay. But you spoke to him recently and he felt like within the month, which hopefully would mean that by November, it will be up and running. But you have this contingency in here. So I just want to sort of say more broadly, leaving aside the 4 versus 9 exemption, residential exemption or sunset around the 4 versus 9, are there any other, and Julia, I know that as you have said, you would really like to see a change in the zoning to accessory use. You've heard from the group a very little interest in moving in that direction. But I do ask you if there are any other options that you or any of the rest of you can put on the table that would allow you to support this package or a package like it going forward. Kathy.
Okay, just quickly, I think that you're right, the 4 times during July and August is the only one that we really seem to have any concerns with or disagreements on for most of the group, and that the language that's in there regarding the registration, I think what I heard expressed at the last meeting was that, oh, as long as you're registered with the state, you're good to go. I don't think that was a good idea, and I'm glad that that clarification is in here, because I think you need to be registered with the town, which is where you renew every year and you pay every year, because otherwise, the whole what's happening now is people are going onto the state, registering, doesn't cost anything, and it's forever. So I don't think that's a good way to do that. So we support that. I definitely do support that. And I just want to make just one more comment that I think that the group has moved in lots of different directions that they may or may not have moved based on our discussions and our working together. And I would hope that that Julia would move in our direction as well, because I don't think that there's anything that has changed really with the positioning that's been put there since the beginning 2 years ago. And I agree with Dave that it sounds like being stuck on one lever and not moving on anything, where there's been a lot of movement for things that people don't like or don't approve of, or maybe think would be harmful, just to get to a yes. And so I would just ask that Julia come with us towards some of these provisions, and then see if we can get to a yes on everything that we've put forward, even when we have reservations about some of them from our supporters, just to get to yes. So thank you. That's what I want to say.
Thanks, Kathy. Jim.
Yes, just a suggestion. I think we've had a lot of great discussions around these issues and around the 9-4. And I am serious about trying to open the window and find something we can agree on, including Peter Kahn. And I understand what you're saying, Peter, but my suggestion for tonight is, we don't know what John Giorgio will say about the legality of the local exemption. My suggestion tonight is, let's do a vote on assuming it's a 9-4 with a residential exemption, but with a 5-year sunset clause, or whatever you want to call that, 5-year clause, where the 4s all revert back to 9. We'll find out, and let's vote on it and just see where we are. And then we'll hear from our town council on the legality of that and the risks of that. And we can amend it. We have another meeting next week. We could certainly amend it based on that. Maybe, for instance, Peter Kahn and I will talk, or Peter Kahn and John will talk, or whoever will talk and thrash out some things. It's a tough issue, but I think that local exemption with a 5-year sunset is probably the best compromise we've come up with so far for tonight, and it may have to change. So that's just a suggestion to us.
John.
Yeah, I agree with Jim that 9-4 with the exemption is the best we've come up with tonight. I don't want to open this up tonight, Stacey, but I would say this, that if for whatever reason the 9-4 is not accepted into the article, then I would like to reserve the right to raise again the issue of caps with maybe a waiting period or a wait list. David this morning sent around the Truckee example where they've done that. So it has been done before. Maybe not in Massachusetts, I don't know. I would prefer not to go that way. I would prefer to go the 9-4. But if that's not possible, then I would like to reserve the right to have a conversation with the group about caps, waiting lists, and waiting periods. Thank you.
Thanks. Julia.
I appreciate, other people's, desire to have full consensus on the work group, and I think that I really have obviously I'm representing a lot of people, so it's not up to me, right, Kathy? So I think that to a certain degree, I'm going to disagree with the fact that, yeah, you might feel like we're coming up with a sort of similar concept, the accessory use, as we've had on the table for a little while. But I've also been part of the organization and, the supporter group for a long time, or for a few years. And I can tell you that our position has definitely moved to a more liberal, frankly, position since the beginning. And I think that, what is being proposed is it's not, you have on the one side, you have the zoning article that is full codification. On the other side, you have grandfathering and it's just a lot. It gets very, very, very close to full codification across the board, with not much to give supporters of, some restrictions and reasonable restrictions. So, I will keep, looking for feedback and looking for better answers. But I don't have much more to say than that for tonight, unfortunately.
We both represent organizations, Julia, so I get that part. And we've had to move from what people wanted to what I thought could get us to a yes at town meeting. So that's what I'm trying to do.
It looks like John is frozen.
I am, yeah, but I can
Yeah.
hear it. Stacy.
Okay, and that hand, your hand being up is a legacy hand, am I
Yes,
correct?
it is. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So maybe we can put that down for you. Let me see. Lower hand. Oh, okay. All right. Well, I think then John's suggestion was to just get a sense from the group right now, if this is the bylaw with clarified language up here about the one property, but up to 2 dwellings that only can be rented together, that all of these stay in here. No corporations going forward can get a certificate of registration from the town. No rentals in deed restricted units, no only 4 weeks in apartments, multifamily dwellings and townhouses. No change of occupancy more than 9 times. After being sold, it's 4 times. After until 5 years, the units can go back up to 9 times. There would be some kind of residential exemption that people have to apply for that will hopefully be framed in the most legal way possible. And that the grandfather, that those with existing certificates, once certificates can be issued prior to this bylaw going into effect, will be able to continue until it is transferred, conveyed, or not renewed. Does not apply to passing down to your children, and the 9 times doesn't apply to the grandfathering. Anything I'm missing here, Peter?
Yeah, I just have a question. In a deed restricted property, is it specified in the deed that they can't rent out any space?
Sometimes, yes, but not always.
Okay, just something to think about. In the apartment buildings and in the deed restricted, we're limiting them, and they're probably the people that need it most. So in terms of making a little bit of money. So, it's I don't know whether we should think about it in a different way.
Dave? Dave, you're muted.
Anyone that's in a deed restricted or affordable unit already has restrictions in their deeds about renting.
No, that's what it is. If they do have it, then it's fine.
The concern is more of the neighbors around, right? Like, just because you can only afford an affordable unit in a certain development, does that mean you should be surrounded by STRs is my only concern with that. So you see it in a lot of other towns' regulations. But I do think that the 4 unit or the 4 contract, I think, resolves a lot of that, and maybe this isn't needed.
Okay.
But are either of you suggesting removing that clause?
No, I just wanted it to be defined. I feel better now.
Kathy?
I'd like I think we need to define the second to last bullet on the conveyance, so transferred. You said it's not to your heirs, but the wording that's in the bylaw doesn't specifically say what the rules are. So I just think if that's our intent, that perhaps John Giorgio needs to put some sort of definition in there to either follow the land bank rules or some rules. We need to understand what they are. But as you explained it, I'm fine with it. I just want to make sure the language is just not specific there, and I think it needs to be.
Okay. Kathy, Karen?
I agree with what Kathy just said. I think it may not be necessary based on what John's saying, but I think that people are going to get confused by it if there's nothing about it specifically. But the other thing I was just going to say about the deed restricted neighborhoods is, we haven't revisited the idea of breaking some of these apart. So I wonder if that was one that maybe we should consider having having it be voted on separately. If people are wavering on that one.
Just to be clear, this does not refer to the neighborhoods with deed restricted. We took that part out and instead put this clause in. And I think that was partly because John Giorgio had some concerns legally about putting, the justification for restrictions in units that are, or in neighborhoods, or, it clarifying it seemed confusing to him. And so he had some concerns about trying to extend it to neighborhoods.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I misspoke. I meant the one about the attached buildings limited to 4 weeks. Like, I just was saying that, if we worry that people will be upset about that in the town, then maybe we break it apart, and if they like it, they can vote on it separately.
But is that just an idea, Karen, or is that something you feel must happen?
That's just an idea that I don't know if we're voting on this. Are we voting that it's all a package together, or are we gonna say that maybe we would look at whether we're breaking apart any of them at a later point?
Right now, there is a package that includes the zoning, the general bylaw, and the extra policies are not part of the package. That's the community impact fee and funding, where that funding goes. But right now, the goal for this group is to get a consensus or an agreement on a package that includes both of these.
Okay. I don't myself have a problem with that particular lever. I just want to make sure that we are kind of thinking through if there are any that are less likely to get support that could lead to it all being voted against. So
Tom.
On the bottom line on this slide, the strikeout on the town body who can provide hardship waivers, are we saying that we are going to take out provision M in the current draft bylaw? Because I think that was put in there just on the kind of cases we were talking about before on the cottage colonies. So
right, but instead they were suggesting the cottage colonies would be automatically exempted directly.
Right, but that's just one potential thing that could be dealt with in those cases. So are we thinking about taking that out completely?
It's a question. What's your sense?
I think that I may be wrong about this, but I think that came from John Giorgio, and wrote that in there in sort of, because we're not gonna, well, obviously we have limited time. We can't cover every little case. So there could be the Board of Health or the ZBA or whatever who could kind of adjudicate those particular cases as instead of waiting till next year's town meeting or special town meeting to change the general bylaw to add some specific cases, right? But we might want to keep it in there and tighten it up for just those particular cases. I don't know. That might be a question for John more than the group can answer.
Yeah,
I agree with that.
The one thing I can tell you is I did have a little exchange with him about provision M. And his comment to me was, if eliminating the waiver is a way to get to yes, I agree it is not worth fighting for, but he didn't go beyond that. So I can ask him more, but I'm curious what all of you think about just whether or not we want to try to keep in a waiver, and if so, since the Board of Health has said they do not want to be the body who deals with the waivers, we could potentially, the bylaws written that the Board of Health creates the guidelines for it. But you could therefore like enact regulations about it, and then maybe a different body actually hears the waivers. I'm open to what, curious to hear what others think about that. Peter, Con?
Yeah, with respect to that, I'm generally in favor of having the waiver in there, although a lot will depend on what K looks like. I mean, because K is included there, and and so until I see what K looks like, I'm not going to commit to the waiver. But the concept in general is one that I'm comfortable with. I do want to raise this issue that John Delano has raised in the chat box here, which I think is important, because I have the same question. He's asking on the grandfathering, if an owner decides not to get an STR permit for a particular year currently, is he or she able to get a permit in subsequent years? And does that preclude, and would it preclude them from leaving an STR property to his or her children? So, I mean, it's important that we have a better understanding of what the grandfathering means. Does that mean that we all have to register immediately? I mean, there's going to be a mad rush to register if you're not registered yet. Unless we clarify this, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I could give you my understanding is that if you do not renew your permit on any year, your grandfathering capacity goes away. Doesn't mean you can't get a permit in subsequent years. It means that, but it does mean that if you have multiple properties, you won't be able to do that again, right? If you have 5 STRs and then 1 year you don't register any of them, you can't come back the next year and register all 5 of your STRs again. That's my understanding.
Well, then it clearly will cause everybody to run. I mean, to register, because circumstances can change. Right? I mean, I don't rent right now, but God forbid something happens and I need to. Go ahead.
Peter, I understand your concern. I think in the vast majority of cases, it would have no effect. And what you're bringing up is exactly why I have grave concerns about a cap, because I think it would make people register right away before the cap went into effect. But I think the only case it would cause people maybe to register quickly would be if they had multiple properties that they had not been using but might use in the future. But I think that's a very small number. And I think for most people with one house or one whatever, they can, as long as they own it already, they can register at any time. And, it would be no different. So
if that's the case, I think we should just, that's great. I think we just need to tighten, make sure the language is clear on that.
I see. Yeah. And I just want to thank you, Peter. I just want to say I think we should leave the hardship in. We don't know what body can do it, but I think it's an important concept.
Mm-hmm.
So I know nothing more than that, but I think it's important.
Okay. Karen, did you want to?
I think we should leave the waiver in just to catch the things that we're not really thinking through. Can we, as part of this, propose that there be the creation of a 3-person or a 5-person body, STR body that would assist the Board of Health, that would, do some things to help with this? I guess it would potentially have to be volunteer, but could we propose something like that? And that could be the place where the hardship waiver comes out. I'm assuming that wouldn't be part of a bylaw necessarily, but
there's about 50 open positions right now for committees.
Yeah, I think the select board should have leave it to the select board to make a decision on that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but we could say that maybe we could recommend it potentially.
Yeah, and John has a suggestion in the chat, was an agency designated by the select board.
Correct.
How do people feel about that?
That's fine. Or a waiver, that's fine.
Okay.
We represent the select board, so that would make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I agree with that. I just think that we shouldn't call it a hardship waiver, just a waiver, and let the town decide who adjudicates that. So that's my only comment.
I agree with you, Kathy.
But again, I just want to make clear that, I'm generally in favor of that. But again, the way it's worded right now, it includes K, and until we clarify what K is going to look like, it's hard to understand what the waiver is going to be.
Right, I mean, the waiver could be.
I proposed the waiver early on based on hardship. That didn't get anywhere. So, kind of ironic here that now we're talking about a hardship waiver that everybody's, clamoring for.
Right, I mean, K is talking about an exemption and M is talking about a waiver.
Yeah, it covers H through K, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, H through K, yeah.
I mean, the bottom line here is I think there seems to be a general consensus that some waiver ability based on some perceived hardship is good, but until we see what the thing looks like, I don't think we can get to ground zero yet.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would just say, like, for K, for example, if there is a residential exemption, there may be a case still that someone who doesn't meet the primary residence exemption criteria, you might still want to provide the 9 times waiver, right? That's what that waiver would be for in that case, right? Maybe it's someone who's rebuying the house that their grandmother once owned and right. And you all decide, yes, you should let this person come back in and do who knows, right? I'm just trying to imagine a scenario in which you might want that. Okay, so here we are. I want to do a little vote then. This is a straw poll. This is not a, official, but it is actually like, for all of you, can you support this proposal as it currently exists, knowing we're going to clear up the language here and we're going to try to get the wording for the residential exemption to meet the highest possible legal threshold, while still providing that leniency for year-round residents who without a means test. I think that's the principle here. Given this, primary members only, please use your reactions tool to either give me a thumbs up or a hand.
Can't we just do an oral vote?
Where's that? Yeah.
You want to go around?
Yeah, just do a vote.
Okay, let's do that. John Kitchener,
Yes.
Jim,
Yes.
Karen,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Peter Schaefer,
Yes.
Peter Kahn,
No.
Julia,
No.
Kathy. Kathy, are you muted?
Yes, unmuted and yes on the vote, sorry.
Thank you. Tom,
Yes.
okay. So we are at 7 out of 9 with the current proposal. So I think the question is whether there are proposals, Peter Kahn and Julia, that you could bring that will meet the stated concerns that you have heard from other members of the group, that will allow you to live with this proposal. You could also bring things that make it at least better for you, even if it doesn't get you to yes. Right, and let me put out here the possibility of abstaining. To abstain would be to say, given the interests of the group that I represent, I cannot say, yes, I support this. But what I can do is step back and say, I am not going to fight it. I am not going to oppose it actively. Right? And maybe there are things that the group could do that would persuade you to not actively oppose the group's proposal, right? Even if it then means it's not something that you support and actively go out and support. Abstentions, right now, we have consensus as defined by the select board, right?
Stacy, can you just make sure everybody listening understands this was a straw poll? I don't want to read on Nantucket Current tomorrow that we voted, 7-9 or whatever, 7-2.
Yes. Thank you. This was a straw poll, meaning we were testing how people feel about this particular package. And knowing that the group 7 out of 9 can live with this package, the group is not done. We have one more meeting, and we've heard that people are willing to work harder, put their heads back together and see, can we get even better than this? Can we get to 8? Can we get to 9? Can we get to abstention rather than opposition, right? And so I encourage you over the next week we cannot have serial conversations with each other outside of the public eye, but you can have a one-to-one conversation with your colleague that then cannot then be, right, you talk to her, she talks to him, we can't do that, but you can propose things to each other as long as it's not being done in a way that creates a quorum or that goes against open meeting law. All right. I am happy if people have ideas, Julia or Peter, Con, if you have ideas and you want to call a subgroup meeting, again, we need 48 hours notice, but if we can do that for Friday, for example, let me know and I will try to pull that together. Otherwise, the plan will be, we'll come back together next Tuesday with any suggestions that people have to try and move us to more of a consensus. And I will talk to John Giorgio to try and get resolved these other questions. And then we will go from there. Peter?
Yeah, can you circulate that last slide, the last slide we were dealing with? Because I think that has the current version of where we are. I'd like to have that so I can deal with that.
Yep. Yeah. Semanish, you can send this out to everybody after the meeting. John?
Yeah, I think, Stacy, if we do have any subgroup meetings, if they are around legal questions, then I don't think it's appropriate to have it without someone from KP Law. So that we have, if it can be John, that would be great. If it can't, it needs to be someone though. So we have, more than one legal view of this.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I do think that Julie has requested that if there's a further subgroup meeting about zoning, that we have Judy there as well. So I can pass that on.
We're allowed to have discussions with our constituents, correct?
You are absolutely allowed to have discussions with your constituents. You may meet with many. In fact, I encourage you to please do so. Now, if your constituent is the finance committee, it's going to have to be in an open meeting for the finance committee rules.
Oh, I could send them the documents though.
You can send them the document.
That's what. Okay.
Yes. Tom?
Daisy, in the Q&A is a question about referencing emails that were going back and forth amongst members without public transparency. And I just wanted to flag that is, unless I heard wrong, that was nothing, nothing was said in this meeting about that. And as far as I know, that no members have been doing that. I just want to make sure that's clear. That is not happening.
Yeah, Megan, the emails that you forwarded to the committee, did those get shared publicly?
Those do not get shared publicly in any form of packet. So, I mean, if someone's interested in a particular thing, they can contact me and I can send that along.
Okay, thanks. All right. Let me open to public comment. I see Alvin Fargo that you have your hand up, and then I'll let Semanish take it from here.
You're all set, Alvin.
Thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you. Would you mind putting up the most recent version of the proposals?
Yep.
Thank you. And the reason I'm asking for that is in the next to last proposal, the reference to the state registrations was inadvertently deleted.
Yeah, it wasn't inadvertently, it was deliberate. The group decided that they did not want to reference the state. Instead, they wanted to make sure that it only was in the context of the town. And the state one was added because people were concerned that the town one might not be there in time to reference. So instead, they've decided to reference the town one, even if the system is not up and running yet.
Boy, I'm confused. Sorry. Those with existing short-term certificates, because they aren't, or within 60 days of the town's establishment. I'm not sure that the present language really makes sense as to what you really mean.
Let me see how John put it in here. Oh, it said prior. So here's the actual
State
language.
registrations prior to the institution of the town's registration system, or.
Here, I'm going to put the legal language in here. And then you can see it. So any person or other legal entity who receives a certificate of registration prior to the effective date of this chapter or within 60 days of the town's establishment of the rental registration program. You guys don't want whatever is later, you want whichever is first, right?
Stacy, can I comment?
Yeah.
So if the registration is going to be coming up, hopefully the end of June, and this will not be voted on until November, I guess most people would be able to register. So it doesn't necessarily make sense to say the 60 days because, right?
Well, but we just don't know for sure that it's like, let's say it's delayed, right?
Right.
And it's still
Right.
not up and running.
But excuse me, but I thought I was talking about fixing, its deletion, but a very major substantive change has been made. When I talked to you at the last meeting, I was assured that people who have been registered by the state and have a certificate of registration would be eligible for Nantucket's short-term rental certificate. And that's the way we left the last meeting. There was agreement on that. And now it appears that's been deleted. And that's.
Yeah, sorry, there wasn't agreement, but just to be clear, someone, maybe it was you, raised a concern that there is no way to have a certificate of registration right now because
That's
the
correct.
certificate, because the registration system is not operating. And so as a quick fix, we thought, oh, let's just reference the state. And we quickly realized that was a problem. And the group asked for an alternative way to do that, and this was the recommendation from John Giorgio.
All right, but then what happens to people like me or my family, who's had a home for 57 years, and that is a subchapter S corporation? I'd love to go in and register that. And I even made a call today to the Department of Health, but I couldn't get through. But they're going to say to me, oh, no, you're a corporation. It says
No.
right here, it says that corporations are not allowed to have a certificate. I'm screwed.
No, no.
And I can say at the meeting, it was agreed that there are corporate forms like even subchapter S was referred to. Stacy, you summarized that, what the sense of the group.
Yeah.
That there are organizations like a subchapter S where they're really real people, family owned, et cetera. But that language has never been put in here to, even a hint to that. And so when you go to talk to somebody in the Department of Health, they're going to say, I'm sorry, you're a corporation, you're out.
So I think the idea here is that this grandfathering, this provision is meant to protect everybody who applies for a certificate of registration within 60 days of the certificate of registration program becoming operational.
And of course, you would need to qualify, right? When you do apply. And
No, it's anybody applies, they apply and they get a certificate based on the previous rules, not based on the new rules. That's the idea.
Oh,
And
okay.
even if it's a corporation that goes to a natural person, you would qualify.
Right, you're grandfathered. It's basically it's a grandfather.
Yeah.
So anybody who applies, regardless of what their status is.
Get it.
Okay.
And then when you sell it, then it kicks in.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that. I'm just amazed at, okay, I didn't understand you were going this direction.
But we might
And
want to
the-
add in here where we, at the front, number 2, second bullet point, where it says owned by a corporation shall not be eligible. And that's not necessarily true.
The language in the actual legal stuff, this is just a summary.
This is right. This is why the problem of using the slide and not the language in the bylaw.
Right.
So let me stop sharing this. Let me start sharing the actual legal language.
Judy's with us.
Thank you very much for this. It's really important to us.
Yeah. Okay, here's the language in the bylaw, right, where it says short-term rentals are eligible to receive a certificate of registration for dwelling units owned by an LLC trust or solely family-owned corporation, such as a corporation only
Oh,
when every
well, that's fabulous.
is a natural person.
I've been looking for that language for the last 6 weeks. Thank you. That takes care of my concern.
Okay, excellent.
Oh, I didn't know that language was ever in there. I've never seen that before.
You can sleep tonight, Alvin.
Yes,
Thank you for adding it.
all
Thank
right.
you.
John Delano.
Thank you, Stacy. I'm going to be very quick, just 2 points. First, as both an insider and outsider, somebody who's observed this process, even without voice or vote, I just want to respond to what I saw recently as unfounded attacks on you all, on the STRWG working group. Because from my standpoint, you guys, all of you, all 9, have done a terrific job. And you've worked hard, you put many, many hours in, and you're, I think, now working well to find compromise and to reach an agreement. So the suggestion that you came in with a closed mind, the majority of you do not own short-term rentals. The notion that somehow you're beholden to a particular interest group. Obviously, you represent certain organizations. That makes perfect sense. but the attack that somehow or other this was a bias group from the get-go, and that the work product does not reflect a lot of hours and a lot of time put in by everybody, both with respect to the data, but also with the policies and the levers, and I might add the input from the public in the variety of meetings that I know I've been part of. So number one, I just wanted to say thank you. And I think the community owes a thanks. No matter what happens, no matter what the outcome is, a lot of hours were expended by individuals here, and each of you deserve credit for that. The second point I wanted to make is that I'm a compromiser. Obviously, you saw my letter. I'm trying to find ways in which bring people together. It may be pretty tough with Julia's position with respect to the auxiliary uses, but I would encourage everybody to try to find a way to reach an agreement with Peter Kahn. After all, his organization represents 85% of the taxpayers on the island of Nantucket. And I think it's important that the non-voting taxpayers be included in some way, shape, or form, or that Peter be made to feel comfortable. And maybe John Giorgio can do that with the legal language or whatever can happen. But I just want to emphasize again how important I think it is. I realize this is not the final vote. It could change in a week, who knows? But just again, want to encourage everybody. And thank you all for all that you're doing.
Thank you, John.
Thanks. Peter Hall or Hallie? Let's talk.
Yes, thank you. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
We are.
Great. I certainly echo what was just said, and thank you all. One thing I just want to ask really is that I took a look at the STR scenarios which were written, and I think it's very important that as part of the completion of this group's work, that those scenarios be completed and carefully vetted. I know some of them are either incomplete or not entirely correct right now. And I think they will be very important for the voters to, look at, and instead of dealing with the very intense language of the draft bylaw, be able to look at this and say, oh, I fit under 1 or I fit under 3, and this is what it means to me. And so I think it's a very valuable and important document, and it'd be even good if you can all sort of feel that you understand the language and that it is correct. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right. Great. So I think that is our wrap for today. We do have that document, the scenarios with John Giorgio's comments. So Semanish, you sent that out to everybody, I think,
yes,
this afternoon. Yeah. Megan, maybe you can get that posted so that the public is able to see that as well.
And big thanks to Karen for coming up with those scenarios. Those are really good.
Great idea.
Thanks. But feel free to add some if you can think of others. That was just what came to my mind.
So everyone, please do feel free to reach out to me if you have other ideas. And beyond that, we will see you all next week.
Thank you.